3 years ago, I was like you, checking my bank account multiple times a day, calculating every expense, lying awake at night wondering how I'd pay next month's bills. Money stress was eating me alive from the inside out, and no matter how hard I worked, the anxiety never went away. Then I discovered something that changed everything. Not a get-rich-quick scheme, not a business strategy, not an investment tip. I learned a quantum principle so simple, so fundamental, that once I truly understood it, money worry became impossible. Not difficult, impossible. Today, I never check my bank balance with anxiety. I never calculate whether I can afford something with fear. I never lose sleep over financial security. And it's not because I'm rich. It's because I discovered the secret that makes money worry obsolete. The establishment is furious that this information is getting out. Financial institutions profit from your money anxiety. The entire economic system depends on people believing in scarcity. When you discover what I'm about to share, you become dangerous to their business model. This isn't about making millions overnight. This is about achieving something far more valuable: complete freedom from money worry, regardless of how much you currently have. When you master this quantum principle, you'll understand why billionaires sleep peacefully while broke people with secure jobs stay awake worrying. I'm going to show you the exact realization that ended my money anxiety forever, why this threatens the people who profit from your financial fear, and how you can apply this principle starting today to never worry about money again. But I need to warn you, once you see this, you can never go back to financial anxiety. The worry will simply evaporate because you'll understand something about money that makes fear impossible. Are you ready to never worry about money again? Money worry isn't really about money. It's about the illusion of control and the programming that keeps you trapped in financial anxiety, regardless of how much money you actually have. I used to think that having more money would end my money worries. But then I met people making six figures who were more anxious about money than people making minimum wage. I met millionaires who checked their portfolios obsessively and lost sleep over market fluctuations. That's when I realized money worry has nothing to do with money amounts. Money worry is a consciousness trap. It's a way of thinking that creates anxiety regardless of external circumstances. People with this consciousness worry when they have little money, and they worry when they have a lot of money. The amount changes, but the worry remains constant. The trap works like this. You believe that financial security comes from having enough money to control future outcomes. You think that if you just had enough savings, enough income, enough investments, you could guarantee your financial future and eliminate uncertainty. But here's the cruel reality. There is no amount of money that eliminates uncertainty. Markets crash, economies collapse, currencies devalue, businesses fail, health crises arise. No amount of money can control the infinite variables that affect your financial future. So you're trapped on a hamster wheel. You work harder to earn more, thinking more money will bring security. But more money just means higher expenses, bigger risks, and more variables to worry about. The anxiety doesn't decrease. It evolves. The financial system profits enormously from this trap. Banks sell you security through loans and credit. Insurance companies sell you protection from uncertainty. Investment firms sell you growth to outpace inflation. Employers keep you dependent through benefits and salaries. All of these institutions benefit when you believe that external financial structures can provide internal peace of mind. They profit from your belief that money can buy security, because that belief keeps you forever dependent on their products and services. But the deepest part of the trap is psychological. Money worry creates a survival consciousness that actually repels money. When you're constantly anxious about not having enough, you broadcast a frequency of scarcity that attracts more scarcity experiences. You make decisions from fear rather than wisdom. You miss opportunities because you're focused on protection rather than creation. You attract people and situations that match your anxiety frequency. The worry itself becomes the biggest obstacle to financial flow. Money worry also disconnects you from your natural creative abilities. When you're in survival mode, your brain's creative centers shut down. You can't see solutions, opportunities, or possibilities because your consciousness is consumed with threat assessment. This is why people often have their biggest financial breakthroughs after they've reached rock bottom and stopped worrying. When the worry finally exhausts itself, their natural creative intelligence comes online, and they start seeing opportunities that were invisible before. The trap is complete because society validates money worry as responsible and realistic. If you're not worried about money, people think you're naive or irresponsible. If you're relaxed about finances, you're accused of not taking life seriously. But here's what I discovered. The people who are most financially successful are the least worried about money, not because they have so much that worry is unnecessary, but because they understand something about money that makes worry impossible. They understand that money is energy, not matter. Energy flows according to consciousness principles, not physical laws. When you align your consciousness correctly, money flows naturally. When your consciousness is misaligned, no amount of effort creates sustainable flow. This is the quantum principle that ended my money worry forever. Money is not scarce. Consciousness that attracts money is scarce. Once you develop abundance consciousness, money worry becomes impossible because you know you can create money from consciousness at any time. The realization that changed my life forever happened during what seemed like a financial crisis. I had lost my main source of income, bills were piling up, and I was spiraling into panic. I was calculating how many weeks I could survive, making lists of expenses to cut and applying desperately for any job I could find. Then, in a moment of exhausted surrender, something shifted. I realized I was expending enormous mental and emotional energy, trying to control an outcome that was fundamentally uncertain. All my worry, planning, and calculation couldn't guarantee any particular financial future. In that moment of letting go, a profound understanding emerged. I had been approaching money backwards my entire life. I had been trying to use external circumstances to create internal peace. I thought that having enough money would make me feel secure, and feeling secure would make me happy. But it dawned on me that consciousness creates experience, not the other way around. What if, instead of trying to accumulate enough money to feel abundant, I learned to feel abundant regardless of current circumstances? What if abundance was a consciousness state that attracted money, rather than money being a physical thing that created abundance consciousness? This was my quantum realization. Money is not the source of financial security. Consciousness is. Money is an effect of consciousness, not a cause of consciousness. When you have abundance consciousness, money appears. When you have scarcity consciousness, money disappears. Once I understood this, I realized why money worry was impossible for people with true abundance consciousness. You can't worry about something you know you can create at will through consciousness. It would be like worrying about whether you can think thoughts or feel emotions. The quantum field responds to consciousness, not circumstances. If you have scarcity consciousness, the field arranges circumstances to match that consciousness. Unexpected expenses, income reductions, financial emergencies. If you have abundance consciousness, the field arranges circumstances to match that consciousness. Unexpected income, profitable opportunities, financial windfalls. This explained everything I had observed, but couldn't understand before. Why some people attracted money effortlessly while others struggled despite working hard. Why some people stayed wealthy despite making poor financial decisions while others lost money, despite being financially savvy. It wasn't about financial intelligence, work ethic, or market conditions. It was about consciousness. People with abundance consciousness lived in a different financial reality than people with scarcity consciousness. I realized that all my financial education had been focused on external strategies: budgeting, investing, saving, earning. But no one had taught me that consciousness was the foundation that made all external strategies effective or ineffective. With scarcity consciousness, even good financial strategies produce mediocre results because your energy field is attracting limitation. With abundance consciousness, even simple financial strategies produce extraordinary results because your energy field is attracting opportunity. This understanding completely flipped my relationship with money. Instead of trying to manage external financial circumstances to feel secure, I began cultivating internal abundance consciousness, knowing that external circumstances would align accordingly. The moment I made this shift, something remarkable happened. The anxiety disappeared instantly, not because my external financial situation had changed, but because I understood that my financial experience was determined by my consciousness, not my circumstances. If I could control my consciousness, I could control my financial experience. And consciousness was completely within my control, unlike external circumstances which were influenced by infinite variables beyond my influence. This was liberation. I was no longer at the mercy of economic conditions, employer decisions, market fluctuations, or unexpected expenses. My financial experience was determined by something I had complete control over, my consciousness. But the realization went even deeper. I understood that abundance consciousness wasn't just about attracting money. It was about recognizing that true security comes from knowing you're a creative being capable of generating value in infinite ways. When you know you can create value from consciousness, money becomes simply one form that value can take. You're not dependent on any particular income source, investment, or external financial structure, because you know you can create new value streams from consciousness whenever needed. This eliminated not just money worry, but the entire foundation that money worry was built on. The belief that your financial security depends on external circumstances beyond your control. Once I realized that financial security comes from consciousness, not circumstances, worry became impossible because I knew I would always have access to the source of all financial experience, my own consciousness. The moment people discover that financial security comes from consciousness, rather than external circumstances, entire industries built on financial anxiety start losing their power. This is why there's a coordinated effort to keep this understanding hidden from the masses. The banking industry depends on your belief that security comes from saving money, rather than developing abundance consciousness. They profit when you store your money with them out of fear, rather than investing it confidently in your own creative abilities. When you understand that abundance consciousness attracts money faster than compound interest, you stop being impressed by tiny savings account returns. When you know you can create money from consciousness, you stop being dependent on their financial products. Insurance companies profit from your fear of uncertain futures. They sell you protection from circumstances you might never experience, paid for with money you definitely have right now. Their entire business model depends on people believing that external protection is necessary for internal peace of mind. Once you develop abundance consciousness, you realize that the best insurance is your ability to create value in any circumstance. You stop trying to insure against uncertainty and start developing the consciousness that thrives regardless of external conditions. The investment industry benefits when you believe that financial growth comes from external market performance rather than internal consciousness development. They manage your money because you don't trust your own creative abilities to generate wealth. People with abundance consciousness don't need money managers because they understand that consciousness creates opportunities faster than markets create returns. They invest in developing their consciousness first, knowing that external investments will naturally align with their abundance frequency. Employment systems depend on people believing they need external income sources, rather than developing their own value creation abilities. Employers maintain control when employees believe their financial security depends on job stability, rather than consciousness mastery. When people discover they can create income from consciousness, traditional employment becomes optional, rather than necessary. This threatens the entire structure of economic control that depends on people believing they need permission to survive financially. The education system profits by teaching people to seek external credentials rather than developing internal creative abilities. They sell degrees and certifications because people believe external validation is necessary for financial success. But abundance consciousness reveals that value creation comes from internal creativity, not external credentials. People with developed consciousness can generate income in ways that no degree or certification could teach. Even the self-help industry is threatened by this understanding. They profit from people believing that financial success requires complex strategies, expensive coaching, and ongoing external guidance. When people realize that abundance consciousness is natural and accessible to everyone, they stop purchasing expensive programs that promise to teach them what they already know how to do instinctively. Government systems benefit when people believe they need external protection and support, rather than developing their own abundance consciousness. Social programs maintain relevance when people believe their financial security depends on institutional assistance. People with abundance consciousness become self-reliant not through isolation, but through understanding their natural creative abilities. This reduces dependence on government programs and threatens systems built on managing dependent populations. The media profits from financial anxiety by selling information that reinforces scarcity consciousness. Financial news, economic forecasts, and market analysis all program people to believe their financial future depends on external conditions they can't control. When people develop abundance consciousness, they stop consuming anxiety-producing financial media because they understand their financial experience is determined by their consciousness, not external economic conditions. Even religious institutions sometimes benefit from financial anxiety by teaching that poverty is virtuous and abundance is suspicious. This spiritual programming prevents people from developing abundance consciousness by making them feel guilty about financial prosperity. The coordinated suppression happens through education that focuses on external financial management rather than consciousness development, media that constantly reinforces scarcity narratives, social programming that equates financial worry with responsibility, and cultural beliefs that make abundance consciousness seem naive or unrealistic. But the suppression is ultimately impossible, because abundance consciousness is your natural state. Every child demonstrates abundance consciousness until they're programmed out of it. The understanding that consciousness creates reality is accessible to anyone willing to observe their own experience honestly. When enough people discover this truth, the entire system based on financial anxiety and external dependence will collapse. People will stop trading their life energy for artificial security and start creating value from their natural abundance consciousness. This is why they're furious. Not because this understanding is wrong, but because it's so obviously right that once people see it, they can never go back to believing in external financial security. Your financial liberation threatens their profit margins. Your abundance consciousness makes their scarcity products obsolete. Your creative self-reliance reduces their institutional relevance. They're not angry because you're being irresponsible. They're angry because you're becoming too powerful to control. Making the shift from scarcity consciousness to abundance consciousness isn't about changing your thoughts. It's about recognizing the consciousness that was always there underneath the programming. This shift can happen instantly once you understand what you're actually shifting into. Most people think abundance consciousness means thinking positive thoughts about money, but thoughts are just the surface level. Abundance consciousness is a fundamental knowing about the nature of reality. That consciousness creates experience, not the other way around. The shift begins with recognizing that you are consciousness, not a physical being who sometimes experiences consciousness. You're not a body that has consciousness. You're consciousness that appears to have a body. This isn't philosophy. This is practical understanding that changes how you relate to everything, including money. When you know you are consciousness, you realize that your financial experience is literally an extension of your being. Money doesn't come from outside sources. It flows through consciousness channels that you can open or close through your state of being. The first stage of the shift is releasing the illusion of external financial control. This happens when you finally accept that no amount of planning, saving, or external security can guarantee any particular financial future. This isn't resignation. It's liberation from the impossible task of controlling the uncontrollable. Most people resist this stage because they think releasing control means becoming passive, but it's actually the opposite. When you stop wasting energy trying to control external circumstances, you have full energy available for the one thing you can control, your consciousness. The second stage is recognizing your natural value creation abilities. Every human being has unique gifts, perspectives, and abilities that can create value for others. But scarcity consciousness blinds you to these abilities because you're focused on what you lack rather than what you have. Abundance consciousness reveals the infinite ways you can create value. You start noticing problems you could solve, services you could provide, and contributions you could make. Your creative intelligence comes online because you're no longer operating from survival mode. The third stage is developing trust in consciousness principles. This means understanding that when you embody abundance consciousness consistently, the external world reorganizes to match that consciousness. This isn't belief. It's direct experience that you can verify through experimentation. Start with small experiments. Notice how differently people respond to you when you're genuinely relaxed about money versus when you're anxious. Observe how opportunities appear when you're focused on creating value versus when you're focused on getting money. The fourth stage is releasing money as a goal and embracing it as a byproduct. When money becomes the primary focus, you create resistance because you're trying to extract value rather than create value. When value creation becomes the focus, money flows naturally as appreciation for the value you provide. This shift eliminates the desperation energy that repels money. Instead of chasing money, you become attractive to money because you're operating from the consciousness that naturally generates financial flow. The fifth stage is developing present-moment financial confidence. This means knowing that regardless of current circumstances, you have access to abundance consciousness right now. You don't need to wait for external conditions to improve. You can access abundance consciousness immediately. Present-moment abundance consciousness is powerful because it's not dependent on future outcomes or past experiences. It's based on recognizing what's available to consciousness right now, which is unlimited creative potential. The sixth stage is embodying abundance as your natural state, rather than something you achieve. This happens when you realize that abundance consciousness isn't a special state you need to work to maintain. It's your natural condition that emerges when programming is removed. Children naturally embody abundance consciousness until they're programmed with scarcity beliefs. The shift is actually a return to your natural state rather than developing something new. The final stage is using abundance consciousness for purposes beyond personal financial gain. When you've developed stable abundance consciousness, you naturally want to use it in service of something larger than personal accumulation. This alignment with service amplifies abundance consciousness exponentially. This isn't about becoming altruistic. It's about recognizing that abundance consciousness is most powerful when it's aligned with creative contribution rather than just personal acquisition. The shift isn't linear and doesn't happen the same way for everyone. Some people experience sudden quantum leaps where everything changes overnight. Others experience gradual evolution, where each stage unfolds naturally over time. What's consistent is that once the shift begins, it becomes self-reinforcing. Abundance consciousness attracts experiences that confirm abundance consciousness, creating an upward spiral that makes returning to scarcity consciousness increasingly difficult. The shift is permanent once it's complete because you can't unknow what you've discovered about the relationship between consciousness and experience. You might temporarily forget and fall back into old patterns, but the understanding remains available and you can access it again quickly. Most importantly, the shift eliminates money worry not by solving external financial problems, but by revealing that financial security was never dependent on external circumstances in the first place. Developing practical abundance consciousness means learning to embody abundance in everyday financial situations rather than just understanding it conceptually. This is where the theory becomes lived experience that actually eliminates money worry. The foundation of practical abundance consciousness is learning to feel abundant, regardless of current financial circumstances. This isn't about pretending you have money you don't have. It's about accessing the feeling of abundance that exists, independent of external conditions. Abundance is actually your natural state when fear and programming are removed. You can access this feeling right now by remembering times when you felt truly grateful, deeply loved, or completely safe. These feelings are all expressions of abundance consciousness. Practice feeling abundant by appreciating what you already have, not as a technique to get more, but as a recognition of the abundance that's already present in your experience. The air you breathe, the food you eat, the relationships you enjoy, all of these represent abundance. The first practical application is making financial decisions from abundance consciousness rather than scarcity consciousness. This means asking, what would someone with abundance consciousness choose, rather than, what can I afford? This doesn't mean spending money irresponsibly. It means making decisions based on value creation and long-term wisdom, rather than fear and short-term security. Someone with abundance consciousness invests in their development, chooses quality over cheapness, and makes decisions that align with their vision rather than their current limitations. The second application is approaching income generation from value creation rather than extraction. Instead of asking, how can I get money? Ask, how can I create value? This shift changes your relationship with work from desperate necessity to creative contribution. When you focus on creating value, money becomes a natural byproduct rather than an elusive goal. People pay for value, so the more value you create, the more money flows to you. This eliminates the anxiety of trying to extract money from reluctant sources. The third application is handling financial challenges from abundance consciousness rather than panic. When unexpected expenses arise or income decreases, instead of spiraling into worry, ask, how is this situation perfect for developing my abundance consciousness? This doesn't mean being passive about financial problems. It means addressing them from a resourceful state rather than a reactive state. Abundance consciousness generates creative solutions that scarcity consciousness can't see. The fourth application is managing money from abundance rather than scarcity. This means making financial choices that honor abundance consciousness rather than reinforce limitation beliefs. Pay bills with appreciation rather than resentment. Save money from wisdom rather than fear. Spend money with joy rather than guilt. How you handle money is always reflecting and reinforcing your consciousness about money. When you handle money from abundance consciousness, you strengthen abundance consciousness. When you handle money from scarcity consciousness, you strengthen scarcity consciousness. The fifth application is building wealth from consciousness rather than strategy. Focus on developing abundance consciousness first, knowing that effective financial strategies will emerge naturally from clear consciousness. Most financial strategies fail because they're applied from scarcity consciousness. With abundance consciousness, even simple financial approaches produce extraordinary results because your energy field is attracting opportunity. Without abundance consciousness, even sophisticated strategies produce mediocre results because your energy field is creating resistance. The sixth application is dealing with other people's financial anxiety without absorbing it. When friends, family, or media try to activate your financial worry, maintain your abundance consciousness rather than matching their scarcity frequency. This doesn't mean being insensitive to others' struggles. It means being helpful from a stable consciousness rather than joining them in anxiety. You can only help others from a consciousness you've stabilized in yourself. The seventh application is using money as a tool for consciousness development, rather than an end in itself. Notice how different amounts of money affect your consciousness and use these observations to develop mastery over your internal state. Money becomes a spiritual practice when you use it to develop non-attachment, generosity, and trust. The goal isn't to accumulate money but to develop the consciousness that makes money worry impossible. The eighth application is timing financial decisions from intuitive wisdom rather than logical analysis alone. Abundance consciousness includes access to intuitive intelligence that knows timing, opportunities, and optimal choices beyond what logical analysis can determine. Learn to feel the difference between inspired financial action and forced financial action. Inspired action feels natural and energizing. Forced action feels effortful and draining. The ninth application is maintaining abundance consciousness during economic uncertainty. External economic conditions are always fluctuating, but abundance consciousness remains stable because it's based on universal principles rather than temporary circumstances. Practice maintaining inner abundance regardless of what's happening in markets, economies, or global financial systems. Your personal financial experience is determined by your consciousness, not external economic conditions. The final application is teaching abundance consciousness through example rather than preaching. The most powerful way to share this understanding is by embodying it consistently. People will notice your lack of money worry and your natural financial flow, and they'll want to understand how you achieved that state. Teaching happens naturally when you've genuinely embodied the consciousness you're sharing. Your life becomes the evidence that abundance consciousness works. Once you've eliminated money worry through abundance consciousness, you discover that financial peace is just the beginning. Abundance consciousness transforms every aspect of your life because it reveals universal principles that apply far beyond money. The first discovery is that abundance consciousness eliminates all forms of scarcity-based anxiety. Once you understand that consciousness creates experience, you stop worrying about health, relationships, opportunities, or any other area where you previously experienced scarcity thinking. You realize that the same principle that ended money worry applies everywhere. When you embody the consciousness of what you want to experience, that experience manifests naturally. Health consciousness creates health experiences. Love consciousness creates love experiences. Success consciousness creates success experiences. The second discovery is that abundance consciousness reveals your true purpose and natural gifts. When you're not consumed with survival anxiety, your authentic interests and abilities become apparent. You discover what you're naturally drawn to create, contribute, and express. Most people never discover their true gifts because they're too busy trying to make money in ways that feel safe, rather than exploring what they're genuinely passionate about. Abundance consciousness gives you permission to follow your authentic interests because you know you can create money from consciousness regardless of the field you choose. The third discovery is that abundance consciousness naturally leads to service and contribution. When your personal abundance is secure, you naturally want to help others experience the same freedom. This is an obligation. It's the natural expression of abundance consciousness. Service amplifies abundance consciousness because it aligns you with the universal principle that giving and receiving are the same energy, flowing in different directions. The more you give from abundance consciousness, the more abundant you become. The fourth discovery is that abundance consciousness creates effortless success in all areas. When you're not forcing outcomes from scarcity consciousness, you naturally align with opportunities, people, and circumstances that support your highest good. Success becomes a natural expression of abundance consciousness rather than something you have to struggle to achieve. You attract what you need because your energy field is coherent and attractive rather than desperate and repelling. The fifth discovery is that abundance consciousness develops into wisdom about the nature of reality itself. You begin to understand how consciousness and manifestation work at fundamental levels. This knowledge becomes practical wisdom you can apply to any situation. You develop the ability to create desired experiences consciously, rather than hoping they'll happen accidentally. This isn't control. It's conscious participation in the creative process that's always operating. The sixth discovery is that abundance consciousness creates genuine confidence that's independent of external circumstances. You develop unshakable self-trust because you know you can handle whatever arises through the power of consciousness. This confidence isn't based on past achievements or future guarantees. It's based on knowing your essential nature as consciousness itself, which has unlimited creative potential regardless of temporary circumstances. The seventh discovery is that abundance consciousness leads to natural leadership and influence. People are attracted to individuals who embody abundance consciousness because it feels safe, inspiring, and possible. Your presence becomes healing for others who are trapped in scarcity consciousness. Leadership emerges naturally rather than being forced. You become someone others look to, for example, in guidance, not because you're trying to lead, but because you embody something they want to experience for themselves. The eighth discovery is that abundance consciousness creates deep fulfillment and life satisfaction. When you're not constantly worried about survival, you can appreciate the beauty, love, and joy that are always available in the present moment. Life becomes an expression of creativity and love rather than a struggle for security. You discover that fulfillment was never dependent on external achievements, but was always available through conscious appreciation of what is. The ninth discovery is that abundance consciousness connects you with like-minded people who are also operating from abundance rather than scarcity. Your social circle naturally evolves to include people who support and amplify your abundance consciousness. These relationships are based on mutual abundance rather than mutual neediness. They're supportive, inspiring, and growth-oriented rather than draining, competitive, or limiting. The final discovery is that abundance consciousness becomes a gift you give to the world simply by embodying it. Your presence demonstrates that scarcity consciousness is optional and that abundance consciousness is available to everyone. You become living proof that financial worry is unnecessary and that abundance is the natural state of consciousness. This gives others permission to explore their own abundance consciousness and break free from scarcity programming. The journey beyond money worry reveals that financial peace was never really about money. It was about discovering your true nature as consciousness itself. Money worry was just one symptom of the fundamental misunderstanding about who you are and how reality works. When you resolve the misunderstanding, not only does money worry disappear, but you gain access to your unlimited creative potential in every area of life. You become who you were always meant to be before programming convinced you that limitation was real. Living from abundance consciousness means that abundance becomes your default operating system, rather than something you have to remember to practice. This is when the transformation becomes permanent and effortless. The first characteristic of living from abundance is that financial decisions become natural and intuitive, rather than stressful and complicated. You know instinctively what choices align with abundance consciousness and what choices reinforce scarcity consciousness. You find yourself automatically choosing quality over cheapness, value over price, and investment over hoarding. These choices don't require willpower or discipline. They emerge naturally from abundance consciousness. The second characteristic is that you stop tracking money obsessively while becoming more financially aware and strategic. Paradoxically, when you stop worrying about money, you often become better at managing it because your decisions come from clarity rather than anxiety. You pay attention to finances when attention is useful, but you don't check accounts compulsively or calculate expenses frantically. Money becomes a tool you use consciously rather than an obsession that controls your thoughts. The third characteristic is that income generation becomes creative and enjoyable rather than desperate and difficult. You find ways to create value that align with your natural interests and abilities. Work becomes an expression of your creativity rather than a struggle for survival. Opportunities appear naturally because your energy field is attractive rather than desperate. People want to collaborate with you because being around abundance consciousness feels good. The fourth characteristic is that you handle financial challenges with calm resourcefulness rather than panic and worry. When unexpected expenses arise or income fluctuates, You respond from creative problem solving rather than emotional reactivity. You trust that solutions will emerge because you understand that abundance consciousness always generates solutions. Challenges become opportunities to demonstrate abundance consciousness rather than threats to your security. The fifth characteristic is that you become naturally generous without depleting yourself. Generosity flows from overflow rather than sacrifice. You give because you have abundance to share, not because you're trying to prove your worth or manipulate outcomes. This generosity creates positive energy cycles that increase abundance. When you give from abundance consciousness, you're not losing anything. You're circulating energy that returns to you multiplied. The sixth characteristic is that you inspire abundance consciousness in others without trying to convince them. Your example demonstrates what's possible. People notice your lack of money worry and your natural financial flow, and they become curious about how you achieved that state. You become a living demonstration that abundance consciousness is real and available. This influence happens through presence rather than persuasion. The seventh characteristic is that you make long-term decisions from vision rather than short-term decisions from fear. You invest in your development, your relationships, and your purposes because you're building a life rather than just surviving day to day. Your decisions are aligned with your highest values and deepest purposes rather than being driven by immediate financial pressures. The eighth characteristic is that you experience synchronicities and lucky breaks more frequently. This isn't because abundance consciousness creates luck. It's because abundance consciousness makes you available to opportunities that scarcity consciousness would miss or reject. You're more likely to say yes to opportunities that seem risky to scarcity consciousness but are obviously beneficial to abundance consciousness. The ninth characteristic is that you develop natural financial intelligence and business acumen. Understanding consciousness principles gives you insight into how value is created and exchanged. You understand market psychology and human behavior at deeper levels. This intelligence emerges naturally rather than being forced through study. You understand money and business from the inside out because you understand the consciousness principles that govern all exchange. The 10th characteristic is that money becomes completely neutral, neither good nor bad, just a tool for conscious creation. You lose both the fear of money and the worship of money. Money becomes simply energy that can be used for beneficial purposes. This neutrality eliminates both greed and guilt around money. You can have money without being corrupted by it, and you can use money without being controlled by it. Living from abundance consciousness means you've integrated this understanding so completely that it operates automatically. You don't have to think about being abundant. You simply are abundant. This integration usually takes time because you're unwiring decades of scarcity programming while establishing new neural pathways of abundance consciousness. But once the integration is complete, abundance consciousness becomes as natural as breathing. The beauty of living from abundance is that it's sustainable and self-reinforcing. Unlike temporary motivation or forced positive thinking, abundance consciousness generates experiences that confirm its validity. You live in a positive feedback loop where abundance consciousness creates abundant experiences, which reinforce abundance consciousness, which creates more abundant experiences. Most importantly, living from abundance consciousness means you're finally free to be yourself without the constraints of financial anxiety. You can pursue your authentic interests, express your natural gifts, and contribute your unique value without worrying about whether it will generate enough money. When money worry is eliminated, your authentic self can emerge fully. You discover that you were never meant to live in financial anxiety. You were meant to live in creative abundance, sharing your gifts and enjoying the incredible experience of being conscious in a responsive universe. When you embody abundance consciousness consistently, it creates ripple effects that extend far beyond your personal financial experience. Your transformation contributes to collective awakening and systemic change in ways you might not immediately recognize. The first ripple effect is within your immediate family and close relationships. People closest to you are most affected by your consciousness shift because they're in your energy field regularly. They notice your decreased financial anxiety, your increased creative expression, and your natural flow of opportunities. Some family members might initially resist your transformation because it challenges their beliefs about financial reality. Others will be inspired and curious about how you achieved financial peace. Either way, you're providing an example of what's possible beyond scarcity consciousness. Children are especially sensitive to consciousness shifts. When parents embody abundance consciousness, Children naturally develop abundance consciousness too. You're breaking generational patterns of financial anxiety and programming, creating a different foundation for future generations. The second ripple effect is in your professional and business relationships. When you operate from abundance consciousness, you attract collaborators, clients, and opportunities that match that consciousness. Your business relationships become more creative, supportive, and mutually beneficial. You also influence workplace culture by demonstrating alternative approaches to money and success. People notice that you're not driven by financial desperation, and this gives them permission to consider different relationships with money and work. If you're an employer or leader, your abundance consciousness creates environments where others can develop their own abundance consciousness. Teams become more innovative, collaborative, and successful when they're not operating from scarcity and competition. The third ripple effect is in your community and social circles. Abundance consciousness is contagious in positive ways. When people interact with someone who embodies genuine abundance consciousness, it activates dormant abundance consciousness in them. You become a catalyst for collective consciousness elevation. Community projects, social initiatives, and local economies benefit when more people are operating from abundance rather than scarcity consciousness. Your presence in social situations shifts group dynamics toward possibility thinking rather than problem focus. Conversations become more creative and solution-oriented when abundance consciousness is present. The fourth ripple effect is economic and systemic. As more people develop abundance consciousness, economic patterns begin shifting from scarcity-based competition to abundance-based collaboration. Industries built on financial anxiety lose their grip when people no longer believe in external financial security. New economic models emerge that honor consciousness principles and value creation over extraction and manipulation. The transition isn't always smooth because existing systems resist change, but abundance consciousness ultimately creates more sustainable and equitable economic structures. The fifth ripple effect is environmental and planetary. When people operate from abundance consciousness, they naturally make choices that honor long-term sustainability rather than short-term extraction. Abundance consciousness recognizes that true wealth includes planetary health and collective well-being. Scarcity consciousness drives overconsumption and environmental destruction because it believes in limitation and competition for resources. Abundance consciousness drives conservation and regeneration because it understands that true abundance includes environmental harmony. As more people embody abundance consciousness, business practices, consumer choices, and economic policies shift toward sustainability and regeneration rather than depletion and destruction. The sixth ripple effect is cultural and educational. When abundance consciousness becomes more common, educational institutions begin teaching different relationships with money, success, and creative potential. Cultural narratives shift from stories of struggle and limitation to stories of creativity and possibility. Art, media, and entertainment begin reflecting abundance consciousness rather than reinforcing scarcity programming. Children grow up with different assumptions about what's possible, what success means, and how reality works. This creates generational shifts that compound over time. The seventh ripple effect is spiritual and consciousness evolution. As people discover that consciousness creates reality, they naturally begin exploring deeper questions about the nature of consciousness itself. Financial transformation becomes a gateway to spiritual awakening. People realize that if consciousness can create financial abundance, it can create any type of experience. This leads to exploration of consciousness potential beyond material manifestation. Collective consciousness evolution accelerates when more people are operating from expanded awareness rather than survival consciousness. The eighth ripple effect is technological and innovative. Abundance consciousness naturally leads to innovation because it's not limited by current circumstances or conventional thinking. People operating from abundance consciousness see possibilities and solutions that scarcity consciousness can't perceive. New technologies emerge from abundance consciousness that serves collective well-being rather than just profit maximization. Innovation becomes collaborative rather than competitive. Scientific understanding advances more rapidly when researchers operate from abundance consciousness because they're more open to paradigm-shifting discoveries. The ninth ripple effect is global and systemic. As abundance consciousness spreads, it affects international relations, economic policies, and collective problem-solving approaches. Nations begin approaching global challenges from abundance consciousness rather than scarcity consciousness. This leads to collaborative solutions rather than competitive conflicts. Global issues like poverty, climate change, and resource distribution are approached from understanding that there's abundance available when consciousness principles are applied correctly. The final ripple effect is evolutionary and cosmic. Individual consciousness transformation contributes to species-wide evolution. As humanity develops abundance consciousness collectively, we become capable of creating realities that seemed impossible from scarcity consciousness. We discover capabilities and potentials that were dormant while we were trapped in survival consciousness. This leads to evolutionary leaps in human potential and creative ability. Your personal journey from money worry to abundance consciousness is not just individual healing. It's contributing to collective transformation that affects all levels of existence. Every person who breaks free from scarcity programming makes it easier for others to break free. Every individual who embodies abundance consciousness strengthens the morphic field of abundance consciousness for everyone. This is why systems that profit from scarcity consciousness resist abundance consciousness teachings. They understand that individual transformation leads to collective transformation, which threatens their control and profit structures. But the ripple effect is ultimately unstoppable because abundance consciousness is the natural state that emerges when programming is removed. It spreads organically through presence, example, and energetic resonance. Your liberation from money worry is a gift not just to yourself, but to everyone whose life you touch. You become a transmission station for abundance consciousness, helping others remember what they temporarily forgot through scarcity programming. Once you've experienced the shift from money worry to abundance consciousness, maintaining that shift becomes crucial because old programming will try to reassert itself, especially during challenging circumstances. The first key to maintenance is understanding that abundance consciousness isn't a permanent achievement that you attain once and keep forever. It's a living practice that requires ongoing attention and conscious choice, especially in the beginning. Think of abundance consciousness like physical fitness. Once you develop it, it becomes easier to maintain, but you still need regular practice to keep it strong. The difference is that abundance consciousness practice is enjoyable rather than effortful once you understand what you're maintaining. The second key is developing daily practices that reinforce abundance consciousness rather than allowing default programming to run automatically. This includes morning practices that establish abundance consciousness for the day and evening practices that integrate abundance consciousness experiences. Morning practices might include gratitude appreciation, abundance visualization, or intention setting for creating value. Evening practices might include reviewing abundance experiences from the day or appreciating progress in consciousness development. These practices don't need to be elaborate or time-consuming. Simple, consistent practices are more effective than complex, sporadic practices. The goal is to establish abundance consciousness as your default state, rather than something you access occasionally. The third key is learning to recognize when you've slipped back into scarcity consciousness and having tools to return to abundance consciousness quickly. Early warning signs include anxiety about future finances, obsessive checking of accounts, or making decisions from fear rather than wisdom. When you notice scarcity consciousness arising, don't judge yourself or panic about backsliding. Simply acknowledge what you've noticed and consciously choose to return to abundance consciousness. This gets easier with practice. Develop specific tools for returning to abundance consciousness, breathing techniques that shift your state, appreciation practices that reconnect you with abundance, or questions that redirect your focus from scarcity to possibility. The fourth key is managing your environment to support abundance consciousness rather than trigger scarcity consciousness. This includes curating your media consumption, choosing supportive social connections, and creating physical environments that reinforce abundance. Avoid or limit exposure to financial fear programming from news, social media, or conversations that reinforce scarcity consciousness. Instead, expose yourself to content and people that support abundance consciousness development. Create visual and auditory reminders of abundance consciousness in your environment. This might include inspirational books, artwork that represents abundance, or music that elevates your consciousness. The fifth key is using challenges as opportunities to strengthen abundance consciousness, rather than threats that weaken it. When financial challenges arise, frame them as practice opportunities for applying abundance consciousness under pressure. Ask yourself, how would someone with mastered abundance consciousness handle this situation? Then respond from that consciousness, rather than reacting from old scarcity programming. Each time you successfully maintain abundance consciousness during challenges, you strengthen your ability to maintain it during future challenges. Difficulties become training that deepens your mastery rather than tests you might fail. The sixth key is continuing to educate yourself about consciousness principles and their practical applications. Read books, listen to content, and connect with others who understand and practice abundance consciousness. Learning reinforces understanding and provides new perspectives on consciousness principles. The more deeply you understand how consciousness creates reality, the easier it becomes to maintain abundance consciousness consistently. But balance intellectual learning with experiential practice. Understanding concepts mentally is helpful, but embodying them experientially is essential for permanent transformation. The seventh key is teaching abundance consciousness to others through example and direct sharing. Teaching accelerates your own learning and provides accountability for maintaining abundance consciousness consistently. When you're helping others develop abundance consciousness, you naturally maintain higher standards for your own consciousness. Teaching forces you to embody what you're sharing. Start by sharing your experience with friends and family who are curious about your transformation. As you develop confidence, you might teach more formally through writing, speaking, or coaching. The eighth key is aligning your life activities with abundance consciousness rather than forcing yourself to maintain abundance consciousness while doing things that reinforce scarcity. Choose work that allows creative expression rather than mere survival. Engage in relationships that support mutual abundance rather than mutual neediness. Pursue interests that energize you rather than drain you. When your external life aligns with abundance consciousness, maintaining abundance consciousness becomes natural rather than effortful. The ninth key is developing patience with the integration process while maintaining commitment to the transformation. Permanent consciousness shifts don't happen overnight, even when initial realizations are dramatic. Allow yourself to be imperfect while maintaining clear intention to embody abundance consciousness consistently. Growth happens in spirals rather than straight lines. Celebrate progress rather than focusing on areas where you haven't fully integrated abundance consciousness yet. Each step toward greater abundance consciousness is valuable, regardless of how much further you have to go. The final key is trusting the process and maintaining faith in abundance consciousness principles, even when external circumstances temporarily seem to contradict them. There may be periods when abundance consciousness seems difficult to access or when scarcity circumstances persist despite your consciousness work. These are temporary phases in the integration process, not evidence that abundance consciousness doesn't work. Maintain your practice during difficult periods, knowing that consciousness transformation often happens in waves rather than linear progression. Breakthroughs often follow challenging periods. Remember that maintenance becomes easier over time as abundance consciousness becomes more deeply integrated into your identity and automatic responses. What initially requires conscious effort eventually becomes natural and effortless. Once you've stabilized basic abundance consciousness and eliminated money worry, you can explore advanced applications that demonstrate mastery of consciousness principles in sophisticated ways. The first level of advanced mastery is developing the ability to create money from consciousness intentionally, rather than just attracting it passively. This means understanding how to focus consciousness in ways that generate specific financial outcomes. This isn't about forcing or manipulating circumstances. It's about aligning consciousness so precisely with value creation that money flows naturally and predictably. You develop the ability to generate income through consciousness focus rather than depending on external circumstances. Advanced practitioners can create financial opportunities by clearly envisioning needed outcomes, maintaining unwavering focus on value creation, and taking inspired actions that align with their vision. Money becomes a natural byproduct of conscious creation. The second level is developing the ability to influence economic and market conditions through consciousness, rather than being subject to them. This happens when you understand that mass consciousness creates collective experiences, including economic conditions. By maintaining abundance consciousness regardless of external economic conditions, you become immune to economic downturns and capable of thriving during times when others are struggling. Advanced practitioners can even contribute to improving economic conditions by radiating abundance consciousness into collective fields. Their stable abundance consciousness helps stabilize economic conditions for everyone. The third level is developing the ability to create wealth for others through consciousness transmission, rather than just personal accumulation. This happens when your abundance consciousness becomes so stable that it naturally elevates the consciousness of people around you. People in your presence begin experiencing abundance consciousness activation. Business partners become more successful. Employees develop better financial habits. Family members experience improved financial flow. This transmission happens through energetic resonance rather than teaching or advising. Your stable abundance consciousness creates fields that activate dormant abundance consciousness in others. The fourth level is developing the ability to use money as a tool for consciousness evolution rather than just material accumulation. Money becomes a means for exploring advanced consciousness principles and accelerating spiritual development. You might use money to support consciousness development through education, travel, or experiences that expand awareness. You might invest in businesses or projects that serve consciousness evolution. You might give money in ways that support others' abundance, consciousness development. Money becomes a spiritual practice tool rather than an end goal. You use financial transactions to explore non-attachment, generosity, trust, and other consciousness qualities. The fifth level is developing the ability to create systemic changes through conscious wealth deployment, rather than just personal financial success. You use abundance consciousness to generate resources that can address collective challenges and opportunities. This might involve creating businesses that serve consciousness evolution, funding projects that support collective awakening, or developing new economic models that operate from abundance principles rather than scarcity principles. Your financial success becomes a platform for contributing to collective consciousness evolution, rather than just personal accumulation. The sixth level is developing the ability to teach abundance consciousness effectively to others, rather than just embodying it personally. This requires understanding how to communicate consciousness principles in ways that activate abundance consciousness in students. Advanced abundance consciousness teachers can accelerate others' development by creating learning environments that naturally activate abundance consciousness. They understand how to address resistance, facilitate breakthroughs, and support integration. Teaching abundance consciousness becomes a form of consciousness transmission, where students develop abundance consciousness through exposure to masterful embodiment rather than just information transfer. The seventh level is developing the ability to create new realities from consciousness rather than just manifesting within existing paradigms. This means using abundance consciousness to explore possibilities that don't currently exist in consensus reality. Advanced practitioners might develop new technologies, create innovative business models, or establish new forms of economic exchange that operate from abundance principles rather than scarcity principles. They become pioneers of new realities rather than just successful participants in existing realities. The eighth level is developing the ability to maintain abundance consciousness under any circumstances, rather than just during favorable conditions. This means your abundance consciousness becomes unshakable regardless of external challenges. Natural disasters, economic collapses, health crises, or other extreme circumstances cannot disturb your abundance consciousness. You maintain creative capacity and resourcefulness regardless of external conditions. This level of mastery demonstrates that abundance consciousness is truly independent of external circumstances and represents mastery of consciousness principles at fundamental levels. The ninth level is developing the ability to accelerate others' abundance consciousness development, rather than just supporting it passively. You become capable of creating breakthroughs and transformations in others through conscious intervention. This might involve energy work, consciousness coaching, or other methods that directly affect others' consciousness, rather than just providing information or encouragement. You develop the ability to help others achieve in months what might otherwise take years of individual development. The final level of advanced mastery is developing the ability to contribute to species-wide consciousness evolution through abundance consciousness embodiment, rather than just individual or small group transformation. Your abundance consciousness becomes so refined and powerful that it contributes to morphogenic fields that affect human consciousness evolution globally. You become part of the leading edge of human consciousness development. This level of mastery represents service to consciousness evolution itself, rather than just personal or even collective benefit. Your abundance consciousness work becomes part of humanity's evolutionary development. Advanced mastery isn't necessary for eliminating money worry or creating personal financial abundance. Basic abundance consciousness is completely sufficient for those outcomes. But for those called to explore consciousness potential more deeply, Advanced Mastery provides pathways for using abundance consciousness in service of ever greater possibilities for individual and collective consciousness evolution. 3 years ago, I was trapped in constant money worry, checking my bank account with anxiety, calculating expenses with fear, and lying awake at night wondering how I'd survive financially. Today, that person seems like a character from someone else's life. The transformation didn't happen because I got rich. It happened because I discovered that financial security comes from consciousness, not circumstances. Once I understood that I could create money from consciousness, money worry became impossible because I knew I would always have access to the source of all financial experience. This isn't theory or wishful thinking. This is practical understanding based on how consciousness and reality actually work. When you develop abundance consciousness, money flows naturally because you're aligned with the principles that govern all manifestation. The establishment doesn't want you to know this because their profits depend on your financial anxiety. Banks, insurance companies, employers, and even government systems benefit when you believe your security depends on their products and services, rather than your own consciousness. But the truth is spreading faster than they can suppress it. More people are discovering that consciousness creates reality, that abundance is natural, and that financial worry is optional programming that can be changed. Your financial freedom isn't just personal liberation, it's contribution to collective awakening that threatens systems built on artificial scarcity. Every person who discovers abundance consciousness makes it easier for others to discover abundance consciousness. The ripple effects of your transformation extend far beyond your personal financial experience. You become a catalyst for consciousness evolution that affects family, community, economic systems, and global collective consciousness. You don't need permission from external authorities to develop abundance consciousness. You don't need special training, expensive courses, or complex techniques. Abundance consciousness is your natural state that emerges when scarcity programming is recognized and released. The shift can happen instantly once you truly understand that consciousness creates experience, not the other way around. Financial security comes from knowing you can create value from consciousness, not from accumulating external resources to protect against uncertainty. Once you make this shift, maintaining it becomes easier over time as abundance consciousness creates experiences that confirm abundance consciousness. You live in positive feedback loops where abundance consciousness generates abundant experiences that reinforce abundance consciousness. The journey continues beyond eliminating money worry. Abundance consciousness becomes a foundation for exploring your creative potential, expressing your authentic gifts, and contributing to collective consciousness evolution in ways that serve something greater than personal accumulation. If this resonates with your inner knowing, if you felt something shift while listening, leave one word in the comments that captures your commitment to abundance consciousness. That word becomes your declaration of independence from financial anxiety. And if you're ready to join others who understand that consciousness creates reality, subscribe to continue this exploration. You're not just following content, you're joining a community of consciousness pioneers who are demonstrating that financial freedom comes from consciousness mastery, not external accumulation. The quantum field responds to consciousness, not circumstances. Your consciousness is shifting right now as you listen to this. Your financial reality will transform accordingly. Money worry was never necessary. Financial anxiety was never realistic. Scarcity consciousness was never true. You were always capable of abundance. You just temporarily forgot through programming that can now be released. Welcome to the end of money worry and the beginning of conscious financial creation.